Well, this lecture is dealing with fiscal policy. Now, we've talked to this point about recessions and the Keynesian revolution and how governments can intervene in the economy. But we haven't formally looked at what the government can do to intervene in the economy. The government has two main options when it deals with intervening in the economy. The first is fiscal policy, which we're going to talk about today. And that's the government using its ability to tax and spend in order to change the economy. The other option is monetary policy, which is changing the amount of money in circulation in order to change the economy. Now, we're going to leave monetary policy for a little while and come back to that, but we need to first take a look at fiscal policy. If we go back and look at the components of GDP, remember GDP is consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. Now, how can we use fiscal policy to change each of these components? Well, let's look at each one of them. Consumption. How can we use taxing and spending to change consumption? Well, probably the first one that is the easiest is to look at is changing your income. Remember, we went through all that Keynesian stuff on the national income accounting, looking at income and consumption. And so if we were to change your income, we could change the amount of consumption you do. Well, the quickest and easiest thing for the government to do is to change the amount of taxes you spend, or you pay, actually. If we were to increase your taxes, what's going to happen to your income? Well, your income's going to go down and your consumption will go down. We could also change the amount of transfer payments you receive. Now remember, transfer payment is a payment for which no good or service is received at the time. So these are monies given by the government to individuals, and the government is not purchasing something from them at the time. So again, remember, transfer payments are things like Social Security, welfare, things like that. Also, the checks that the government is planning on giving certain individuals in this time of crisis also would work in this favor. So look at, why is the government willing to give people checks, cut checks for people right now? Well, one, people are having difficulties because they've been laid off, they've been furloughed, they don't have income, and so they need money in order to spend. We need to buy food, we need to pay our rent, we need to pay our mortgages, we need to pay our car payments. All right, all of those things. So giving you money allows you to spend even though you don't have an income. All right, so all of these things will affect your consumption. Now, if we look at investment, remembering that investment is business spending, the government can affect that in the similar ways. They can change the corporate taxes, decrease the amount of taxes the corporation has to pay, increases their profit, increases the amount they can invest. Government gives subsidies to businesses. Part of the stimulus package the government passed was to help businesses, give them more money. Again, increase their income, increase the amount of spending they can do. Government spending, that's probably a no-brainer. Should we increase spending or decrease spending? If we increase government spending, have them buy a new aircraft carrier, have them hire people to build a bridge, I don't know, whatever. That money then gets put back into the economy. Increasing government spending stimulates the economy. Decreasing government spending contracts the economy. The Keynesian approach concentrated on government spending. The Keynesians feel that government spending is the quickest way of getting money into the economy and easier to control. We'll come back to that in a moment. Let's just finish up with the components of GDP. We also know the last component of GDP is the net exports. And we could change tariffs, quotas, non-tariff barriers. There's all sorts of things we can look at. I don't want to spend any time looking at that now because at the end of the semester when we do the international economy, we'll look at that. All right. Now, let's get back to the other three components. Remember when we looked at national income accounting, we looked at the multiplier effect. And remember, we define the multiplier effect as being the changes in, if you change a component of GDP, you're going to change GDP by a larger amount. Now, remember, that is incredibly important because the government doesn't have to, if it wants to stimulate the economy by $2 trillion, we know that that's going to have a much larger multiplied effect on the economy. So we have to balance what we need to have happen, how we want to change GDP, and we only have to change the component by something less than that. Now, fiscal policy requires that the government do things to spend money or to get us to spend money. And one of the things that we talked about, it's even in the definition, is taxing. So we have to take a few minutes to look at how the government taxes us. Taxes get lumped into one of two categories. The first is a progressive tax. A progressive tax is a tax that as your income gets larger, you pay a larger percentage of your income to the tax. Right? Now, an example of this is our federal income tax. You've got the different tax brackets. The higher your income, the larger percentage of your income you pay to the tax. Now, we set this up, the U.S. government set this up specifically so that the rich shoulder a larger burden. Now, I will certainly agree with anyone who would like to argue with me that the rich don't pay their fair share. I understand that, but at least percentage-wise, they are paying a higher percentage. Now, we could always talk about tax deductions and all that other stuff later, but just looking at the federal income tax, they pay a higher percentage. The rich pay a higher percentage of their income to the tax. And conversely, that means the poor pay a lower percentage of their income to the tax. Right? And I think most of us will agree that that makes sense. Now, the second type of a tax is a regressive tax. A regressive tax is a tax that as your income increases, you pay a smaller percentage of your income to the tax. Now, regressive taxes are a little tricky, simply because we normally do not set up taxes to be regressive. For example, our state sales tax is actually a regressive tax. Now you may be asking, how can that be regressive since We're all paying the same percentage for the tax, right? 7%, 6%, whatever it is. We're all paying the same percentage. So how can the sales tax be regressive? The sales tax is regressive simply because we are all paying the same percentage of it. Go back to think of the national income accounting stuff that we did. And if you remember, as our income went up, our average propensity to consume dropped. As our income went up, on average, we consumed a smaller percentage of our income. Well, if the wealthy are spending a smaller percentage of their income, then they are spending a smaller percentage of their income on the sales tax. Okay? Let's think of it in the opposite direction. The poor are paying or spending the vast majority of their income. And so they are having to pay a larger percentage of their income to a sales tax. Right? Again, keep in mind, we're not talking total amounts. We're talking percentages of their income. Little different way of looking at things. Now, I don't think we've ever set up a tax to be regressive. I can't not think of a time when a government says, yes, we really want to stick it to the poor. At least they don't say that out loud. So regressive taxes tend to be things that we just don't think about that end up being regressive. For example, taxes on cigarettes. The taxes on cigarettes were set up to get people to stop smoking. But since the poor are paying a higher percentage of their income to taxes, they pay a higher percentage of their income to cigarette taxes. All right, it becomes regressive. The only thing I'm trying to stress here is that if you ever find yourself in a government position and you're discussing taxes, think it through. How is this tax going to affect the economy? Or more importantly, who is it going to affect? Make sure you understand whether it's a progressive or a regressive tax. I want to stop here with our discussion of government intervention because I want to get us to understand monetary policy first. And that's going to take us a couple of lectures to get through money and monetary policy. But at the end of our discussion of monetary policy, we're going to come back to this idea of government intervention and the impact of government intervention on things called our national debt and our deficit. So, but for now, think about things that the government can do to conduct fiscal policy. In this time when we're going to be facing very stiff budget deficits, since many people are not getting an income, they are not paying income tax, and since the government is increasing subsidies, we've got an issue here. So let's start thinking about how the government spends its money and how it taxes us. And we'll come back to that in a week or so. All right, take care.